This information that I'm going to be sharing today is from a 40,000 foot view of the whole concept of the serpent culture and how that imagery has passed through multiple cultures throughout millennia. And I hope by the time we're done with this, you'll see the connective tissue that I feel like I saw as I was going through all of this research. So the title of this is The Serpent as a Cultural Symbol for Seafaring. While researching the potential connections between Joseph of Egypt and the Jaredite culture of the Book of Mormon, I discovered ancient symbolism that has blossomed into a major paradigm shift concerning my understanding of prehistoric America. It began with the research on the relationship between Minoa and Egypt, because Joseph was operating as the chief officer of Egyptian FEMA. He was looking to augment the Egyptian agricultural resources should a disaster occur. And he had good intel that a disaster was coming. I would trust that intelligence source, wouldn't you? First, Joseph worked on the Egyptian infrastructure to create efficiencies in production and storage. Water would be critical to people, plants, and animals. Joseph was instrumental in building the Bar Yusuf Canal that redirected water from the Nile to a huge interior reservoir. This is, in the bottom right-hand corner, is the canal as you see it today. It's still in use today. But it was a major undertaking. About 125 miles south on the Nile, they dug out and created a canal that ran parallel with the Nile until it got to this area right here. And that's what causes this whole area to be green. That's what causes this reservoir of water. So that was a huge project that Joseph was involved with to, again, to plan and prepare for this 7 years of lean. Water is critical to life. Then he expanded the Egyptian ability to store and distribute grain with structures like those found in Edfu. Now in the upper right-hand corner, these are the remnants of what they have found, all of these storage bins. And that's located 400 miles up the Nile. Notice that the storage of grain was concentrated in the area that was highly secured from foreign invasion by being 400 miles inland, and where it could be quickly distributed downstream along the Nile to areas of greatest need. So that was a very strategic place to put that. Then Joseph began working with his suppliers to arrange getting product into Egypt should they begin to run short on their domestic production. The approach would have to be twofold. Use the 7 years of plenty to build storage facilities for excess crops, while at the same time establishing trade connections to increase imports and buy while there is an abundance of grain supplies and when they are cheap. Then second, during the 7 years of lean, they would need to utilize the established trade connections to continue imports of grain and livestock so that the drain on the Egyptian surplus is slowed and they are able to last the entire 7 years. So if the Minoans are already traveling the North Atlantic, such as indicated by the Michigan copper and British tin being brought into the Mediterranean, then certainly those same trade routes could be utilized for grain and livestock commodities. Because the trade routes are located in the North Atlantic, there are many places that can be utilized. The northern portion of the Iberian Peninsula, along the English Channel, the British Isles, and even the areas around Nova Scotia and the St. Lawrence Seaway, because they're already coming out of Michigan. But recent research has revealed that the event causing the 7 years of lean was probably on a much larger scale than anyone anticipated. It was a cataclysmic explosion of Mount Aniakchak in the Aleutian Island chain of Alaska. The eruption formed a caldera nearly 7 miles wide, and significant sediments of it were found in the Greenland ice fields. This correlates with the frozen tree rings found in Ireland and other locations of the Northern Hemisphere. This is a Google Earth image of Alaska, and Mount Aniakchuk is right here on the peninsula of this, the Aleutian Island chain. This is an inset blow up of the top of that mountain. That caldera blew off. The caldera formed after that whole top of that mountain blew off, and it's about a 7-mile wide caldera. And what happened is it blew so much sediment and material into the atmosphere that when it caught into the jet streams, they got pulled down into the lower portions here, and so this whole area across here is blanketed as it goes to the east. This means that Egypt's original plan to utilize North Atlantic sources for grain and livestock supplementation is off the table, and a quick alternative plan must be instituted. Understanding the epic scope of the disaster, the Minoans had to find a secondary source that was not affected by the atmospheric blanket caused from the ash cloud. The Olmec culture on the western shores of the Gulf of America would be an ideal secondary location. A year-round growing season and people already present to plant, cultivate, and harvest the crops and tend to the livestock. The Olmec were poised to benefit from this global disaster. As a matter of fact, it is Joseph's Jaredite king contemporary named Emer who provides us with a detailed list of their wealth. His list is not for items used as everyday or staple foods. It is a list of commodities used in trade or for the support of the industry to promote trade. And this is just a brief recap. And in the space of 62 years, they have become exceeding strong, insomuch that they became exceeding rich, having all manner of fruit and grain. Two of the items are the items that Pharaoh saw withering. And of silks and fine linen and gold and silver. I believe those 4 items are actually what they were paid with from Egypt. And also all manner of cattle, oxen, cows, sheep, swine, goats, and many other kinds of animals which were useful for the food of man. So they're being exported as a food source. And that's the second thing that Pharaoh saw withering in the dream, was the cattle. And they also had horses and asses, and there were elephants and curulams and kumams, all of which were useful unto man, and more especially the elephants and curulams and kumams. And it's just my personal opinion that all 5 of those items were imported from the Middle East to assist them in clearing the land, in harvesting the material, getting it down to the seashore where it can be put on ships to be shipped out. And that the curulams and kumams are actually the 2 species of camel, the single hump and the double hump camel. So you have elephants, 2 types of camels, horses and asses, and that's how they get introduced into the Americas. I believe Joseph's successful efforts to prepare and bring Egypt through this hardship became a huge legend in the region, and particularly for those cultures who participated in the success. Minoa had to be one of the primary cultures in the success column. When the 7 years of lean were complete and abundance returned to the land, Egypt reigned as the strongest of all the Mediterranean cultures. All of the participants in that supply chain had learned an incredibly important lesson in planning, adjusting, and producing results. These lessons learned further separated Egypt from other nations and Minoa from other merchant seafarers. The artwork displayed in palaces both in Egypt and Minoa ports celebrated the cooperative efforts put forth to create the collective successes. So there's a recap. We showed you these before. These murals are found in the city of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini. and it infers Minoan shipping to a location of palms, bulrushes, felines, antelope, and people of Canaanite influence. And you can see where that's what's all on the interior here, and then there's a river that comes down and splits into two, just like the Nile Delta does. And there are a total of 12 persons in the housing located between the two rivers. And it's similar to the way that the children of Israel inhabited the Nile Goshen Delta at the invitation of Pharaoh. Also notice that it appears to be Jacob seated across the river opposite the standing figure of Joseph. So you have an elderly, stately gentleman seated over here, and this would be Joseph. He's the tallest and kind of most prominent of these 12. And so I believe that that's indicating that it's Jacob and Joseph. And the sterns of these ships look like the open mouths of serpents. You see how the stern here with the rudder, the way that lays, that's like the open mouth of a serpent, both of these. So it's an introduction, I believe, of serpent imagery. Likewise, there are murals at Avaris in the Nile Goshen Delta done in Minoan-style artwork that display the Minoan practice of bull leaping. And we've gone through this before. This is not just the Minoan art style indicating bull riding, but the bull represents our relationship with nature. And these are units of time. Each one of these double fans is 1 year, so it's telling us that for the first 2 years, the ash cloud is up in the sky and it's creating havoc. Nature is completely out of control. And then for the next 2 years, you have the vegetation of the earth, the back heels of the bull are touching the earth, and the vegetation of earth is turning brown. Nothing's growing because of the blanketing of the sun that took place. And about halfway through the 4th year, into the 5th, and maybe even into the 6th year, that brown earth is now being lifted up by the winds, and it's becoming dust bowl type effects and causing further issues with the growing seasons until the 7th year and going into the 8th year, when the rains return and nature is coming closer to being brought under control because the rain cycles have returned. And the 8th year then would be the first complete year when you have regeneration or fruit that's being harvested. So for these foreign concepts to be illustrated in palatial artwork is a solid indication of cultural relationships and common purposes. Additionally, there seems to be a symbolic relationship embedded in both Minoan and Egyptian artwork. The central deity of the Minoan culture is said to be the snake. Here is a snake goddess that was found at the Crete temple of Knossos. We assert that they are not worshiping the snake. They are displaying their role in a claim to power. They are indicating that their nation, which is symbolized by the female, the nation, is feeding the world, illustrated by the bare breast, by means of connecting the seaways of the east and west, which are the snakes in each of the hands. Note that the animal that is seated on the top of the head is a feline. This implies that the feline nation, Egypt, is at the head of it all. Minoa, therefore, is known as the snake nation because of their seafaring abilities. They slither upon the water and deliver goods from tributary to tributary. Minoa had been connecting the east with the west since 2450 BC, with its copper supply coming into the Mediterranean from the copper mines of Michigan. This concept of snakes representing seafaring is further confirmed by the symbolic use of the Egyptian snake named Apep. During the 14th dynasty, Apep is seen as a friend to Egypt, helpful in assisting its prosperity. And this again is that mural The central theme here is the shipping. There is a doorway here that has been created, the framework of which is the shipping industry. And this agent of Egypt has a staff of authority. He's doing business and interacting with a representative of the serpent. And again, here's a huge serpent, that image that is connecting both its upper and lower. I also believe that this large double coiled snake here is representing the 12 tribes of Israel and their seafaring or marketing that's going on in the Nile Goshen Delta, because there are two main riverways in the Nile Goshen Delta, and there are a total of 12 loops in that serpent. Plus the head is coming in and it's touching the staff of a tomb, indicating that it's bringing in things that are important for maintaining life, the staff of life, so to speak. But then by the 20th, and this kind of further illustrates the serpent imagery, by the 20th dynasty, Apep is illustrated as a power that had to be destroyed. This seems to coincide with Egypt's invasion of Byblos and Sidon. So if this tree represents the Nile coming out of the mountains and then going down and where it splits into the different tributaries of the delta, and that then is the upper portion of the tree, this particular tree is being blocked from access by this serpent. So Egypt, the powers of Egypt, who've had enough now with this, they're not going to be blocked from it anymore. They take the power paw, the right paw, place it on the head, and with their left paw, they take a knife and they cut off the head. They're cutting off the head of the serpent so that they can get access back to the trade that's going out of the Nile Goshen Delta. And that seems to coincide with Egypt's invasion of Byblos and Sidon, which are both ports on the Mediterranean. What is important for us to consider is that ancient seafaring cultures strongly identify with the symbol of the serpent. And why? The image of the serpent provides an object lesson on the life of the mariner. The river deltas that mariners traverse where they harvest the goods undulate back and forth like the movement of a snake. The technique for using wind sails to propel watercraft on the open seas requires a series of sail adjustments that create a zigzag pattern through the water, like a snake. The delivery of products from the supplier to the end user is done in a manner where the recipient is unaware of the origin. The true movement of product from harvest to delivery is undetectable, like the stealth action of a snake. Also, as I was saying, even the pathway through the ocean resembles the slithering action of a snake as they follow the natural currents and trade winds to make their way to a distant destination. And what this is, the Atlantic Gulf Stream comes up, and right about the time that it hits Nova Scotia, Labrador, it then branches out into all these different feeds off of that, the current pathways. And so if you were a seasoned navigator, you would know which one you needed to be on, and so that you would either be going up to Ireland, or you could be going over to the Azores and looking for a pathway into the Mediterranean. But again, you can see how all of that represents snake-like movements. All of these sailing features are powerful seafaring symbols of the snake that have lasted for millennia. Therefore, while the image of the snake originated with the seafaring powers developed by the Minoans, we submit that this imagery evolved to become the identity of all mariners involved in oceanic merchant delivery. An example of the snake imagery in Mediterranean folklore is the Greek goddess Medusa. We believe that Joseph Campbell was correct in stating that the legend of Medusa is memorializing the story of how seafaring powers began and evolved. Through the legend, we can understand that Medusa's ability to turn her enemies into stone was achieved when the individual snakes on the head were able to focus their gaze upon a single purpose. In other words, the singular powers over the numerous river systems focused in purpose to effect a unified outcome. And what that means is, if someone who did not carry the right papers or the right credentials came into port, whether it's the Danube or whatever port you're going into, you didn't carry the right credentials that showed that you were part of their system, you weren't given a place to offload. You had to take it somewhere else. And so you were either part of the system and part of the secrets that are kept to keep that system intact, or you were out. This is the very definition of a cabal, or a council of individual separate interests who enter into hidden agreement to secure control of an industry. Hence, the Minoans controlled the seafaring industry by controlling the secrets of how to navigate the open seas to their suppliers. The Greek legend of Medusa documents how the Minoan cabal was overtaken by the Greeks, in that Perseus beheads Medusa and uses it against his enemies. He then gives it over to the war goddess Athena to place on her shield. This infers that the Greeks took over the power of the seafaring cabal and used it militarily to thwart the powers of their rivals. This is that shield of Athena, and you can see here all the snake tails that form the hair, but then the primary serpents are two, which is interesting because even on the Minoan depiction of this, there were two primary serpents, which I think were indicating Phoenicia and Mycenae, with Minoa almost acting as a broker house because of their location here between these two and all the ports that are all around that island itself on Crete. Again, apparently two primary navies, so to speak, or merchant delivery systems. Based on research done by Manolis Koutlis in his book In the Shadow, it appears that the Greek Mycenaean culture began having heavy influence in the North Atlantic routes during the 15th century BC. This infers that the Mycenaeans began working with the Minoans in colonizing the regions of the North Atlantic. This co-op may have begun in the 17th century BC, with Minoa needing to expand their fleets to supply Egypt, and thereby utilizing the Mycenaean seafarers to keep up with the demand. What Minoa may not have expected is that Mycenae would eventually take full control, hence the legend of Perseus beheading Medusa. Actually, the Mycenaean influence in the North Atlantic may not have been a hostile takeover as much as it was an opportunistic move to fill a void after the 15th century volcanic explosion of Santorini and the consequential damage to Crete, which decimated the Minoan fleets and ports. While Perseus is often displayed lifting the head of Medusa, her beheading may have been the result of an act of God, which would have been the volcanic explosion, and not a military overthrow. Greece, represented by Perseus, was merely the entity left behind to carry on the business of utilizing and protecting the sea routes of proprietary trade. Curiously, it is at this time of turmoil in the Mediterranean that the Book of Mormon records an invasion of serpents that separate the Jaredites from the South Wilderness region where wildlife is abundant. The description of how these serpents behave is more like the actions of humans. Note that the Jaredite serpent invasion is happening at the same time that the explosion of Santorini takes place, which is happening at the same time that Egypt is reeling from the plagues, the Exodus, and the loss of a worker class, which is followed by the Hebrew invasion of Canaanite cities 40 years later. All of these events are creating huge cultural shifts in the Mediterranean region. This means that the Minoan culture economic engine is decimated, the Egyptian culture is experiencing a major restructure, and the Canaanite culture is falling apart. What happens when there are disasters that cause major social upheaval? You have mass migrations. This leaves the Phoenicians and Mycenaeans as the most capable seafaring cultures in the Mediterranean. It could be that these seafarers focused on servicing the Minoan trade routes in the Mediterranean and offered to relocate the refugees but not take them in. Additionally, within a few years, Egyptian and Canaanite refugees are looking for a place that provides safety for families. Again, the Phoenicians and Mycenaeans are able to provide passage. Hence, the Olmec region has a large group of refugees who are looking to start anew. But when these refugees arrive in the New World, there is already a famine in the land. What do a people of desperation do to ensure their survival? They take desperate measures. Perhaps something like stealing herds and taking them to a wilderness area that is defensible. If the Book of Mormon invasion of serpents begins a 400-year occupation of the land, what is happening in the Mediterranean region during this 400-year period? This time frame from 1400 to 1000 BC is almost exactly the period when the Mediterranean cultures were experiencing a series of invasions from a confederacy of naval raiders called the Sea People. The question I raise is this: is it possible that this serpent invasion in the Americas is actually the birthing of an outpost of Mediterranean refugee sea people who are attempting to recapture their hold on the merchant ports of the Mediterranean? And what I'm saying is, if the Mycenaeans and the Phoenicians effectively cut off all of the entry and exit at the Strait of Gibraltar, then you have all of these outposts that are all along Normandy, Norway, the British Isles, the Americas, who were having merchant interaction, and it's not there anymore. And what I'm indicating here is somebody's getting upset about it. Their whole livelihood is now in jeopardy. And so I believe that what's going on is, at least with the people in the North Atlantic, they at least become the Sea Peoples. I'm wondering if the Serpent group here in the Americas isn't also in some kind of support fashion for that confederation that's happening, that's taking place. So it's just a thought. It's a question I throw out there because there may be some kind of connection at some point. The Sea People were not successful even after their many invasions of Mediterranean ports. These invasions stopped by 1100 BC, and Mycenaean and Phoenician seafarers remain as the primary merchant powers in the Mediterranean. It is about 100 years after the Sea People invasions end that we find another Book of Mormon entry concerning cultural events which implies substantial trade. Here we find that Lib reclaims the land southward with its access to the wilderness, where they are able to find wildlife for sustenance. What is interesting to note is that it is about 1000 BC when the archaeological record begins to find a ruling class called Snake Kings in the Patan of Guatemala. These are the earliest Maya. This is a city glyph for the city of Calakmul. And you can see the serpent imagery that's the main element there. Archaeologists state that these people are industrial merchants who wield their power through the means of waterway trade, both tributary and oceanic. If these are the Sea People that were the 15th century refugees, then it appears that the immediacy of their maritime identity had waned through the generations to become content with being the suppliers for maritime trade. Therefore, they moved to areas that were more conducive to the production and trade of commodities. So here is their proposed location between the Grijalva River and the Usinacenta River at the time of that initial invasion during the time of King Heth. And then, at 1000 BC, this is the location of the Snake Kings that the archaeological record tells us about. And they're primarily in this high ground between the two bays, and that's Calakmul, El Mirador, La Tigre, Sabanche, Nakbe. Those are all some of the earliest Maya sites, and they're right here in this region. Eventually, the Snake Kings of the Patan in southern Mexico blend into the Mulekite culture and become the Book of Mormon land Bountiful. But the people of Bountiful retain their serpent symbolism, and it is reflected in the artwork and carvings found in their region. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you here is actually all this region that's Zarahemla. We're talking about 60 BC now. And this is primarily the Nephites and the Mulekites already blended together. 60 BC actually is right in the Moroni Wars. But what I'm going to show you are several of the stele carvings that demonstrate the spiritual iconography that they use, the symbolism that they use in this interior region that's the Yosemite River river system. So what I want to point out is that the use of religious and spiritual symbolism as it develops in the Maya region is a fingerprint of the various cultural influences. And I'm going to make a distinction between the Nephite Mulekite and the Bountiful imagery. So this is hard to see, but this appears at the city of Nephi, which is in Chincoteague, with several of the stelae using quetzal feather headdresses to demonstrate a person with priestly authority. What we have here, this is what's referred to as the Abinadi stela. You have a king over here who's very large. He goes all the way to the top. There's writing that bends toward him, indicating he's a person of authority. This individual is right here, and there appears to be flames coming off of him. He wears a headdress, and then he has a hand that's coming through the flames like this. And symbolically, what that's saying is, right back at you. And that same gesture is what it means today in Mexico. It's not talk to the hand, it's right back at you. And so in essence, this priest is saying, what you've done to me is going to happen to you. All right, well, but this is one of the earliest uses of the quetzal feathers on the headdress that indicates spiritual authority.
Where is this?
At Chincoteague, the city of Nephi. It's in the highlands, on the northern end of the Maya highlands.
And that's where Limhi and then snuck out?
Yes. Yes. All right, there are several lintels and carvings here. These are all out of Yaxchilán, Zarahemla. So, what we have here, by the way, is this quetzal headdress that's huge. All of the quetzal feathers coming off of him. So this man radiates with authority, right? Well, it just so happens that's Shield Jaguar. Shield Jaguar is Mosiah. And Mosiah is actually welcoming in somebody who's bringing in this ball here is a symbol of displaced people. So this is either Limhi with his people out of the city of Nephi, or it is Alma with his people that he's being welcomed into Zarahemla. What you notice here is serpent staff, and we'll get into that here in a minute as to what that represents. Also, over here, we have, again, headdresses with all of these quetzal feathers that are coming off of it. Down here as well, all these quetzal feathers. You also have jaguar wands or scepters, which indicates civil power. Down here, quetzal feathers, you also have these serpent scepters. Down here is quetzal feathers. And look at the scepters that he's holding. That's a dove. That's on the end of like a double cross kind of effect. Same right here. on the double cross. So all of this imagery is right there in Yashitlan, which is Zarahemla. So the concept is used prolifically at Zarahemla with both kings and priests all wearing quetzal headdresses. The only consistent use of serpents in the Zarahemla region appears to be the use of the serpent staff. This seems to be used in the context of Moses in the wilderness when the Israelites were bitten by the fiery serpents. Moses raised a serpent on his staff and stated, "Look on this and live." These serpent scepters demonstrate the serpent descending from above. They are topped with a god K or mannequin god, which we have come to understand is a representation of the Holy Spirit. And so the imagery that's happening here is it's demonstrating the serpent descending down from above, and it is topped by this Holy Spirit on all of these in here. But what the serpent scepter is a representation of the gospel, where man's fallen nature that began with his deception in the garden, hence the serpent, is overcome by the power of God's Spirit. And these are held in the right hand, indicating faithfulness to the gospel, and being a scepter, it represents their authority to operate as a purveyor of the gospel. This serpent scepter imagery is found throughout the Ucayali River system. So it's mostly in the southern part of the Maya lowlands. But it's in the city Bountiful. At Palenque, there's a Temple 20. Temple 20 has, it's actually a burial chamber, but they found no person in it. But painted on the walls were 9, they call them 9 lords of the night, and every one of them has a serpent scepter. And I think it's representing the 9 who chose that when they reached the age of the tree and they died, they would immediately go and be with Christ in his kingdom. But each one of them is holding a serpent scepter. The only exception to the serpent scepter usage is the vision serpent, such as the one found on Limit 25 from Yashitlan, which is Zarahemla. Here we have Lady Kook, who's the daughter of Zarahemla, who's experiencing a visitation from her ancestor. His head and upper body are presenting out of the mouth of the vision serpent to give his blessing for her to marry Shield Jaguar II, which is Mosiah. So you see here, there's a serpent that comes up out of this bottom here. And then the mouth opens. This is the upper jaw, here's the lower jaw. And presenting out of the mouth is the head and upper body of this individual. And he has a message for this lady. Now this has been interpreted as the daughter of Zarahemla. And they say that this individual is the founder. And I found his glyph up above. I don't know if I can locate it right now. But in essence, this is Yoat Balam, which is Mulek. Yoat Balam II was Benjamin. Yoat Balam I was the founder of this king line. And I believe they're giving him the name in the Book of Mormon of Mulek, which the consonants for that is MLK. The Hebrew word that's where they use MLK is king. Okay? Martin Luther King Jr. has the initials MLK. And there was a reason his dad did that, because he was a king. Not a royalty king, but his last name was King. Okay? And so what we believe is that the Book of Mormon is telling us his role. He was the heir of the king line of the Jews, and that's what Mulek means. I believe his given name was Benjamin, and King Benjamin was named after him because he was the first offspring of the joining together of the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Joseph in the New World. But here, as I say, the epigraphers state that this person is the founder of the king line, so in the Book of Mormon terms this is Mulek. However, they may be illustrating him emerging from a serpent because it was the serpent seafarer culture that brought Mulek to the Americas and allowed the planting of the Jewish throne in the Mesoamerican region. The use of the serpent imagery may be an allusion to their bountiful connection. So, because what we don't see here, these are corn kernels. What I don't see here are feathers. So it's not necessarily a feathered serpent, but it is reflecting the fact that the founder who was brought here by the serpents appeared to her in a vision and gave permission for her to marry Shield Jaguar, which is Mosiah. So, as I said earlier, all of those images come out of this region. Now, basically everywhere you see the color gray area is bountiful, and here we find the following serpent images. This is a Levanta carving from our last presentation where we determined that this serpent was representing a culture that the archaeologists refer to as snake kings. In other words, this fan up here isn't a Quetzal feather fan. This is actually representing the Mycenaean helmet fan that the military wore. And so it's identifying this serpent culture as Mycenaean based. Now this is an interesting one. At San Bartolo, we believe, which we believe is a site built by converted Lamanites and inhabited by King Anti-Nephi Lehi, this gospel conversion message is taking place at the mouth of and on the belly of a serpent. It seems that there is a blending of Hebrew teachings for the letter Tet, which is symbolized by the coiled potential energy of the snake, then blending it perhaps with the heritage of the serpent culture of the snake kings. This is the mouth of the serpent over here. And here at the mouth, this is a tooth that's actually touching the back of her head. Well, in Hebrew symbolism, the letter Shin, which is a symbol for fire, is symbolized by a tooth. It bites and injects. Well, the Holy Spirit injects into our spirit. And so she is being touched by the Holy Spirit. She is receiving her daily bread. The individual that is her moderator or mediator is offering up something to the corn god. And what this is a water gourd that has new life coming off of it. So this water rite of baptism is being offered up on her behalf. The corn god is receiving it, and then, this is that same woman over here is now being represented here. Her sins are being lifted off of her. And now, she can stand in the authority of the kingdom. And her name will either be written into the book of life or the book of death. And then the end comes with judgment. But all of this is taking place on the belly of the serpent. And the teaching of the letter Tet in the Hebrew alphabet, it's represented by a snake, and it represents the coiled potential energy that comes out of the snake. When it's in a coiled position, it has that ability to potentially strike out and to immediately move. And so it could be representing, in the Hebrew spiritual sense, it's representing that when we're born into this realm, this is what our potential is to come in contact with the gospel, accept it, receive it, be cleansed, and then walk in the authority of the kingdom and have your name written into the book of life.
So that's all representing the same person.
Pardon?
That's representing the same person.
Same person, same person, same person. And these are then the ones whose testimony is sealed up in these books that will be opened at the end of all things. This one, it's all red, indicating all three axes of their life experience has been activated. Length, width, and the earth to heaven axis is alive. This one never erected the earth to heaven axis. It's the book of death, the book of the dead. This is the book of life. So, but I think that this was significant, it was relative or poignant with the people who had this because they identified as serpents. This was in the region where the snake kings were prominent. That's where this was located. So this is also a Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, and all of these are much more prolific in the Yucatan. Here, this is at Zabanchi. We were just there a couple of years ago. 2 years ago. And they had just uncovered and discovered this Quetzalcoatl image. They did not expect to find anything here with Quetzalcoatl, and they were ecstatic that they had found it. So one of the guides was like, hey, come here, show you this. And he took us back into a region, into an area we weren't supposed to be in. And he showed us this. So here, that's in the Bountiful region. It's in Zabanchi. Here at Uxmal is an image of Quetzalcoatl forming a celestial canoe and a face emerging out of the mouth of Quetzalcoatl. However, the serpent is clearly a feathered serpent. So right here is the mouth. The body goes around and it goes clear down to the end of the facade. It comes back, and here's the tail. And it's in the form of a canoe. And then here in the mouth is a man's face that's presenting out of the mouth. And our interpretation up to this point, until we learn something different, is that the concept is to allow yourself to be immersed in Quetzalcoatl, to be ingested, so to speak, and to become one with Quetzalcoatl. And he will take you then to the afterlife. The celestial canoe this is actually heading to the north, and in this particular quadrangle, the north is the afterlife. Okay. Eventually, the feathered serpent is adopted throughout the entire Yucatan and regions under the influence of Teotihuacan. The feathered serpent is the blending of the serpent nature of fallen man, who was condemned because of his disobedience in the garden. But it is imbued with the feathers of the Quetzal bird, denoting that his nature is being lifted into the spiritual realm of renewed life, redeemed from his fallen state. New life like the phoenix who rises out of the ashes. And it is a common thread with their serpent heritage as seafarers. This, by the way, is at Chichen Itza. Many of you may have been there and seen this, but that feathered imagery is consistent throughout all of the images, the serpent images that are found there. So our next evidence of serpent snake people is unique in that it comes from the Emerald Isle. The legend of St. Patrick details how in the 5th century AD he was captured by Irish pirates at the age of 16 and forced to serve 6 years as a slave until he escaped and made his way back to his home in England. He then becomes a Catholic cleric, returns to Ireland, and in time becomes the first bishop of Ireland. He is credited with converting the polytheistic Celts to Catholicism. The legend is that he drove out all of the snakes from Ireland, an island that has no snakes as part of its ecosystem. The argument we make is that the seafaring people who were predominant in Ireland referred to themselves as serpents. It was their seafaring heritage. St. Patrick shared the gospel, converted them to Christianity, removed the practice of slavery, and rid the island from its serpent cultural practices. The narrative of St. Patrick's story states that, quote, this is a quote, "The snakes had all been banished by Patrick chasing them into the sea after they attacked him during a 40-day fast he was undertaking on the top of a hill, unquote. Again, like the use of the term serpents in the Book of Mormon, these snakes seem to have behaviors that are more like people than reptiles. It seems that the authors are using a metaphoric allusion to bring home the point that these people are cold-blooded, immoral, and have lost their sense of humanity. With St. Patrick successfully pushing the serpents off of Ireland, they move on to other locations, perhaps to Scotland, the Netherlands, or other locations in the North Sea region. The next seafaring culture that identifies strongly with the serpent is the Vikings. The Viking culture originated from the shores of Scandinavia out of the waters of the North and Baltic Seas. These were once port cities of the ancient trade routes of the Minoans and Mycenaeans. The Vikings ruled the North Atlantic for nearly 400 years, from 750 AD to 1100 AD. They explored most of the North Atlantic islands and ventured into the interior of both Europe and North America. Were you aware of that? The Vikings had adventured clear over into the Ukraine. And it's known that they made it at least to Nova Scotia at Ox Meadows. It's also speculated that with the Kensington Stone in Minnesota, they made it clear over onto the other side of the Great Lakes into Minnesota. Their symbolism is obvious, with the serpent head or dragon head often fashioned on the bow of the long ships. We assert that it alludes to their long-standing heritage. The Vikings used the serpent image as a symbol for their seafaring culture. The image and symbolism of serpent representing seafaring people is extensive, and it hints at connections across centuries, continents, and cultures.
Yeah, absolutely.
It all begins with the Minoans, who appear to be the first to brave the ocean waters of the North Atlantic, followed by the Mycenaeans, who eventually memorialized the snake imagery in their legends of Medusa, Perseus, Athena, and Pythia. Then the Book of Mormon hints of the serpents or mysterious sea people that settled in Mesoamerica at around 1400 BC. This group later morphs into the snake kings of the Yucatan and Bataan of Guatemala. It just so happens that the ocean currents around the Caribbean leave the Gulf of America, and the Atlantic Gulf Stream runs directly to Ireland. Did some of the serpent sea people migrate there? And this is just demonstrating. You have the Florida current that comes around here in the Gulf, comes around Florida, and then right up here around South and North Carolina, you hit the Atlantic Gulf Stream, and it takes you up into the North Atlantic. During the 5th century AD, just after the epic battles between the Nephites and the Lamanites were over and Rome had fallen, a young boy named Patrick is kidnapped by Irish pirates. Patrick escapes and later returns to Ireland to convert the island to Christianity and pushes the serpents into the sea. Then a couple hundred years later, the Vikings make their mark in the annals of history. They venture to foreign lands with their serpent-headed longboats. They carry the reputation of being ruthless warriors until they are also Christianized and become more civilized by Western standards. I just recited a 3,600-year overview of Western civilization seafaring from 2500 BC to 1100 AD, and the image of the serpent was the thematic symbol through all of it. Minoa, Mycenae, Maya snake kings, Irish pirates, and finally the Vikings. The world is much smaller and much more interconnected than we ever expected. I did not even mention all of the serpent mounds and petroglyphs found along major riverways in both North and South America. By the way, the Amazon, the reason it's named Brazil is that it's a Latin term that refers to iron. And when the Iron Age began, probably at the same time that the Snake Kings and the Jaredites were supplying all their stuff in the Mediterranean, they were probably developing the iron mines down in Brazil that were coming in, probably the same group of people. So there's all kinds of serpent imagery that's found up the Amazon. There's all kinds of serpent imagery up the riverway systems in the Mississippi and the Cimarron and the Rio Grande, back in these areas that are kind of hidden away, but they're all there. Serpent imagery is a clue to the origins of the people who built and carved this symbolic artwork. It is a statement of their heritage. It is only because of the research that I was performing on the Book of Mormon that all of this information began falling into place. The thin historical hints provided in the Jaredite record has revealed an incredible maritime legacy that answers many questions about prehistoric America. This history demonstrates the power of the Christian gospel in redeeming the animal reptilian tendencies of humanity, and it transforms entire cultures. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the antidote to all that ails this fallen serpent world. The Book of Mormon testimony demonstrates that he is the Savior of the entire world, a world that has been connected by the pathways of the sea ever since our ancestors stepped out of the ark. Because we are all children of Noah, and he was indeed the most prolific seafarer of ancient history, then we are all seafaring serpents. Therefore, our only hope of restoration to the realms of eternity is to be vested with the plumage of the one who rose to the heavens and invited each of us to follow him. Only Jesus provides us the feathers to overcome our serpent nature and fly away to our original home